Having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign last several months, it's not for sale, won't be for sale ever.
I had the pleasure of getting to be at the meeting today between the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Canada. What I witnessed was like watching a grandmaster in chess perform.
Ugh. Anyway, that's Stephen Miller saying the things he has to say about Donald Trump, who I guarantee, I would bet every cent I have that Stephen Miller has absolutely no respect for. But anyway, sucking up to Donald Trump, Stephen Miller definitely is a grandmaster at that. But what he's referring to is the first clip that you saw, which is an excerpt from Mark Carney, the new Prime Minister of Canada, meeting with Donald Trump. And I'm sure they imagined this would be like the meeting with Zelensky, where Trump and members of his cabinet just punch him in the face over and over. And then everybody pretends that that's how the world is supposed to work or whatever. And it wasn't deeply upsetting or disappointing, but it didn't go that way. Mark Carney sort of ran on providing strong opposition to Donald Trump when his party won and he became the prime minister. His initial statement sort of identified that this was a rebuke to Donald Trump and his attempts to meddle in Canadian politics and denigrate Canada and its people. And so what you saw there in that meeting was really a continuation of that, saying that they're not going to be bought, implying that they're not going to be bullied, and they're going to stand up against Donald Trump, which for those of us in America that want to see more of our politicians standing up to him, this is something at least, appreciate them doing that. And so with that said, let's get to one of the big ways that that Canada has been brought up in the American context in this next clip.
Mr. President, you have said that Canada should become the 51st state. Were you joking?
No. Well, I still believe that, but you know, it takes two to tango, right? But no, I do. I mean, I believe it would be a massive tax cut for the Canadian citizens. You get free military, you get tremendous medical cares and other things. There would be a lot of advantages, but it would be a massive tax cut. And it's also a beautiful, you know, as a real estate developer, you know, I'm a real estate developer at heart. When you get rid of that artificially drawn line, somebody drew that line many years ago with like a ruler, just a straight line right across the top of the country. When you look at that beautiful formation when it's together, I'm a very artistic person, but when I looked at that beauty, I said, that's the way it was meant to be. But, you know, I do feel it's much better for Canada. But we're not going to be discussing that unless somebody wants to discuss it.
It's not for sale, won't be for sale.
But never say never. Ever say never.
And you can see him at the end saying never, because of course they're not going to do that. And the entire thing is obviously purposefully insulting. That's what all of this is, which is why, like, I would love to have the reporter stop with the like, hey, are you being serious or are you joking? He's trumping. That's what he's doing. It's simultaneously serious and it's joking and it's trolling and it's all of that. That doesn't mean we have to take it seriously and we can know that it's an attack. That's what it's designed to do. But as we jump into our conversation about this, David, let's also acknowledge some of the lies that they would get much better health care. I have a feeling Canadian citizens might have a little bit to say about their healthcare system versus ours. Also, free military. Did you know we have a free military? That's interesting because I thought I saw that he was proposing a $1.1 trillion military budget for 1 year, which seems like whatever the exact definitional opposite of free is, it seems like that's what our military actually is, David. But what do you make of all this?
Well, first of all, my little surprise, as you can see, I have the Canadian flag over there, over my shoulder. I am actually half Canadian. A lot of people don't know this about me, but my father was from Montreal. I had dual citizenship until I was 18 when I was forced to declare an American. And even though I consider myself, 50% Canadian these days, I want to pump it up to about 95% for all of the obvious reasons. I thought actually the grandmaster in all this, and Stephen Miller didn't say Trump by name, but you could easily think that he was talking about Carney, because Carney was both respectful and polite, as Canadians are, but he was firm. And in that clip, the reason that it came up that, well, so you never say never, is that Carney's, the setup for that, which we didn't play, was that Carney said, just as in real estate, some things are never for sale. And Trump was nodding and nodding like the dog that he is, the obedient dog to Carney. And Carney was sort of flattering him by speaking in a language or a term that Donald Trump liked, but Carney was making his point. So I actually thought, in looking at all of this, that Carney owned the room. Carney was confident, he was articulate, he was the sort of respectful visitor that I guess the Trump White House likes. I'm still not sure what it is that Donald Trump wants out of Canada, other than being the 51st state. In terms of these trade deals, it's still sort of unclear to me what he would accept in terms of some sort of arrangement. But having said that, I thought the Canadian Prime Minister played this about as well as he possibly could.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good read. And also on what Trump wants. Who the hell knows what he wants?
Right.
And I'm including Donald Trump in that. Like, do we really think that he has like a bullet point list of carefully thought out plans that he's been working towards? I don't think anybody thinks that.
One of his bullet points, he keeps talking about we want our own lumber. We want our own wood. Well, the fact is that Canadian lumber, because it's colder, the wood is harder. And this has been outlined in a couple different YouTube videos. And that's why Canadian lumber is so popular for construction in the United States, that it's got a certain density that American wood doesn't have. Now, some people may say, oh, we got plenty of trees. And Donald Trump said, we got all the trees we need. We don't need Canadian lumber. But actually, if you talk to people who use lumber in construction, they will say, no. Canadian lumber is worth what it costs Americans, and we prefer to have that over the lumber that is from trees in the United States. And that's one of the reasons Canadian lumber is so popular here. But that concept seems to escape Donald Trump and his minions like Stephen Miller and the rest.
Interesting. I mean, two big revelations about Canada, that you're half Canadian. Also, I didn't know that thing about the trees. But unfortunately, I'm coming out of this now thinking that Donald Trump must stuck his head in a refrigerator quite a bit, because like Canadian wood, he's quite dense and thus can't understand the issue vis-a-vis trees. But anyway, and like American trees, thanks to global warming, he can't get as hard as he used to. Oh, but done. But that said, we're talking about the trade deals.
John, but I'm liking it.
Just talking about trees. That's all I'm talking about. But anyway, let's catch people up a little bit on what has happened that has led, other than the rhetoric of talking about 51, the 51st state or whatever. So let's talk about the trade difficulties between our two countries. So until February, US and Canada were bound by the United States, Mexico, Canada free trade agreement, a deal brokered by Trump himself in his first term. And I read that to remind everyone watching that he brokered that deal. Also to remind him, because he didn't seem to remember that when he came in and implied that it was a deal that a moron had set up. It was actually him, so I guess he was finally right. In early March, he decided to break that deal that he had negotiated by issuing this blanket 25% tariff on Mexico and Canada. That went into effect briefly before it was suspended after leaders from both countries promised to take more action to stem the flow of fentanyl and illegal immigration into America. But a 25% tariff is still in place for imported goods from both Mexico and Canada that are not compliant with the original terms of that deal. And Trump also announced a 25% tariff on all cars, steel, and aluminum in recent months, as well as a tariff on auto parts, which I think is still in effect. Honestly, like most people in America, it is very hard to track which of these tariffs are still happening and which are not, which have been canceled by a judge, which are, I don't know. Who knows? So, but in response to some of the earlier stuff, they did put a tariff on some of our products, a 25% tariffs on about $22 billion worth of US imports, plus an additional 25% duty on about $22 billion in response to Trump's metal tariffs. They also slapped tariffs on cars imported from the United States. So again, this is causing a lot of trouble economically. It will certainly cause for us, both for the things that we need to buy, including, that nice hard wood that they have that ideally we need to do the construction we desperately need for all the issues with our housing market, but also for our businesses selling abroad. It's caused problems. And Donald Trump has, like a grandmaster, he has come up with multiple ways to screw over our businesses, because not only the fact that they now have the 25% tariff on us and even higher on some products means that Canadians will buy fewer of our products, but also because Donald Trump has decided to go beyond just trade war and constantly insult Canada and imply that he might conquer it at any time. A lot of Canadians have built up this national pride founded in thumbing their nose to the US. So that affected the results of the election, and Carney might not might not even be prime minister if not for that. But also, you have a lot of products that Canadians refuse to buy at any price right now. And I've seen sporting events. I watched the WWE. When they go to Canada, when the American theme was playing, they were booing it. And so that is a product of Donald Trump. You would not have had that a year ago. And so, we have a poll up right now. The text of which is, will the US ever be able to mend ties with Canada? That's available at tyt.com/polls. And so you can answer that. And I don't know, I mean, nothing is permanent, David, I assume with a new president who, stops spitting in their face constantly, we can get that relationship back. But I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, I'm an optimist. I actually think that a new president who makes Canada a priority, just as like when Barack Obama was sworn in as president in 2009, the very first foreign trip he made within 2 weeks was to go to Ottawa to visit Canada because he recognized the importance of Canada as America's biggest ally, most important trading partner. I think a president who prioritizes Canada and says, look, we're gonna drop all these tariffs. We're gonna try to bring back all of these businesses, particularly on the border towns that have suffered so greatly. And to your point about Canada and the boycotts of American products, they're actually winning this trade war. I mean, unlike Americans who say, "Oh, we're gonna not buy certain products," Canadians are literally uniformly not buying American products off of store shelves. So countless businesses that depend on Canada are going out of business. The number of tourists have dried up by something like 40% of Canadians are not coming to the United States who otherwise would have. That the total cost in terms of the cost of tourism in the United States from all the countries that are boycotting the United States is something like $100 billion estimated for the year. And again, countless businesses, particularly in border towns in Washington State and in Maine and in Vermont, are drying up because Canadians are not willing to cross the border. Canada is unified. They're infuriated, and I think Americans, for the most part, are sort of like, it's not a big deal. And Donald Trump is certainly not aware of how much damage he has inflicted on Americans, but that damage is significant. And I think perhaps the next president who comes along and recognizes, okay, we treated Canada horribly, maybe issues an apology, changes policy. I think Canadians, being so polite and thoughtful as they are, will welcome somebody who's anything but Donald Trump.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. And until then, we appreciate our Canadian viewers. I hope that you know that he's not our president, at least in terms of the vote. But anyway, we appreciate you and all that you provide and the long time, the great ally that Canada has been to America. Hopefully someday we can resume that.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.